Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Total Podcast with me, your host, Phil Scott. So, on today's very special episode, I have quite an accomplished woman here. And one thing I really love about my podcast is I've had a lot of wonderful women guests. And then this one, she comes along and it's boom. I just love this. So, my guest is Caroline Blaze Jensen. So, let me give you some of Caroline's credentials. So, let's start here. So, Caroline is a retired Lieutenant Colonel Air Force pilot, correct? Um,
Yes.
she's flown combat missions, and you've flown combat missions in Iraq, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You were a member of the Thunderbirds,
I was. I flew the right wing, the number three position.
yes, and I think you were the first mom to do that as well.
Yeah, I like to say my son was the first kid to get to watch their mom fly in the show.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And also, you're an author now, and you're doing other things as well. So you're doing so much, and you have done so much. So let's jump right in at Caroline. So Caroline, thank you so much for being on the show today. I truly appreciate it, and it's an honor to have you on. So thank you.
It's my honor, Phil. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. All right. So first of all, let's talk about where you were born and where you grew up.
Well, I grew up in Wisconsin. My grandparents on my mom's side were dairy farmers, and actually, my grandma on my mom's side, before the dairy farming and before she was married, she actually served in World War II.
Wow.
In the Coast Guard. Yeah. So she was a woman veteran of World War II, which is pretty rare. And she was a very patriotic woman. And then on my dad's side, my grandfather over there was actually in the Coast Guard as well. And, you think of Coast Guard as non combatants, but they were very much involved in a lot of the combatants and hunting submarines and whatnot to protect the fleets during World War II. And then my dad is a Vietnam helicopter pilot. He was in the Marine Corps during Vietnam.
Jerry
So
Bolt, correct?
no, actually, that Jerry Bolt is my wonderful editor's father.
Okay.
But Tom Bong is my dad. But
Okay.
it's funny you mentioned Jerry Bolt. I was actually just at the Air Force Academy yesterday visiting where he is buried at, and
Oh,
sent his daughter, who's my editor and my friend, a picture because her dad was a Thunderbird, flew the slot position and passed away during a functional check flight mission in an F-4. So, and she was about 3.5 years old, which is the same age my son was when I went to fly for the Thunderbirds. And it's Lisa, who's Jerry Bolt's daughter, that really helped me to make um, a actual physical book out of just a scrap of paper that I had written an idea for a book on.
now that was that 1972 that he flew his final mission.
Yes, it was in December of 72. Yep.
Wow. So you have this history of being in the military in your family, but also this connection to other military members as well. Um, is that what inspired you to go into the military, into the Air Force as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I was really enamored with flying from a young age. And like a lot of people, I saw the movie Top Gun. I think it was out on VHS tapes. It was probably like 1987. I was about 12 years old, and I didn't want to be Charlie, the female instructor. I wanted to be Maverick. So I was really excited about that. And but I decided I wanted to go towards the Air Force. And when I went to talk to my liaison officer for the Air Force Academy, he said, "Well, you're too young right now," because I was only 12, and you have to wait till around your sophomore, junior year to become a cadet candidate for the military academies. And at that time, women were not legally allowed to fly in combat or in combat aircraft. So because of that, I went back and told my dad. I was pretty heartbroken, upset, and he said, "You know what?" And he introduced me, told me about the stories of the World War II women Air Force service pilots, and got me a book. And they had flown every mission except for combat and every aircraft in the inventory. And he told me, "It's your job to be prepared. So when the rules change back again, that you're, qualified and ready to go." So that was what those veterans and that history really kept me going. And I had the really distinct honor to be friends with probably at least 10 amazing WASP and most of them have passed on now. I think there's only about six that are still living, and one of them is 103 years old.
Oh,
And I just
wow.
visited her a couple weeks ago. Her name is Nell Mickey Bright. She's in Salt Lake City, and her favorite airplane is the B-25. So she's completely sharp as a tack. We literally visited for over 9 hours one day and a couple
Wow.
hours the next day. And yeah, she's just lovely and full of life. And, you know, um, had an amazing career, was a amazing mom, was the first woman stockbroker in Arizona after she, flew planes during World War II. So you can't not be inspired by that.
That's awesome. Well, I wanted to ask you too, during your time in the Air Force, and flying the combat missions, what was that experience like for you?
That's a great question. I think when I signed up for the Air Force, like I was kind of scared. Like I didn't want to go to combat. And really the point of the military and what we do in the Air Force is you train for war, but you pray for peace, right? We wanted to deter our enemies from doing anything. And I was a lieutenant, I think, when 9/11 happened. Yeah, I'd only been in the military for 2 years, so it's maybe um first lieutenant at the time. When the Twin Towers were hit, I was driving to work when the first one, and I watched the second one in the squadron room. So I knew that, there was something um, that was going to be, that I was going to be involved in. So um, being deployed in combat, your life is really simple. You don't have to pay bills. You don't have to change the oil in your car. You have very little laundry to do because you don't have a whole bunch of clothes. We would literally like sleep, work out, fly, eat, and then do it all over again. Um, and I was in Iraq during 2007, where they call that time frame the surge, because there was a major increase in Al Qaeda Iraq attacking Americans and our allies on the ground. And so we were there to try to stop that and put an end to the uptick in attacks. I was at Balad Air Base, which they called Mortaritaville, because we were getting mortared quite a bit every single day, and they'd have sirens go off. It got to the point where it was almost like, oh, there's another one. You weren't even scared. You'd like, if you're in the mess hall, you'd sit under the table and like grab your food off the the top, and you're kind of hunkered down beneath it. Luckily, I never knew of anybody who got hit by one of them, so it was kind of a nuisance. But I don't know, everything that I had trained for up to that point really served me well. And when I look back on my career and I think about like what I was meant to do with my life, I know that I did some great things and um, saved the lives of our troops and our allies, and helped protect the citizens of Iraq against Al Qaeda. And yeah, I think even more than the Thunderbirds, like that was really kind of my purpose.
Now, what was it like flying the F-16, and what version of the F-16 did you fly?
I flew three different blocks. So I flew a 30, a 40, a 42, and then I think it's 52. The 0 or the 2 depends on if it's a GE or a Pratt and Whitney aircraft. Um, and so like the most powerful aircraft I flew was the one that we flew with the Thunderbirds, with the block 50 with a Pratt 229 engine in it, which is 30,000 pounds of thrust in
Wow.
afterburner. Yeah, it's not a joke. Very responsive. But I love the F-16. It's like so sleek, and you get in there, it's got this bubble canopy, and the rails of the canopy are pretty low, so you almost feel like Wonder Woman in the invisible jet, because you're kind of like sitting up and you can really see everything. And it's a single seat fighter. There's a couple of two-seat trainer models, um, but you're always in a formation with someone else. So there's like a real strong wingman concept. But as far as flying and moving sensors and targeting pods and making sure you have fuel and um, running everything, you had a radar, a heads up display, you might have a targeting pod, you're wearing night vision goggles sometimes. And then you're trying to figure out where you're going based off of maps. And in Iraq, we had codes to figure out where we were going. So everything was really complicated, and it was a big puzzle, and I loved putting it all together too. the aircraft is made to be kind of like we're sitting here breathing, not thinking about it. It's very second nature so that you can um, work all the sensors and have awareness of what's going on outside of the aircraft.
Mhm. Now, when you learned to fly it, when you did the training, how long did it take to train to learn how to fly the F-16?
Um, that specific training, I started in April and I think I graduated in December. But I mean, it goes all the way back to when I was 20 or 19 years old and I went to the Air Force Academy and I'd only been airborne like 4 times, like once in a 172. I flew to Denver and back to go to camp at the Air Force Academy. And then my flight to basic training was only the fourth time that I'd ever been airborne. But I knew what I wanted to do. Luckily, I was kind of naive, but it worked out. So I started flying gliders at the Air Force Academy, and that taught me a lot of airmanship and energy management and, just basic airmanship and aviation skills. And then I went and got a private pilot's license. So that was like 1990, let's just call it 95. So to 05, it was, 10 years from when I really started at the academy and started my first flying till I got into my first fighter squadron.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah,
So it was a
so there's a
while.
lot that goes into it. Yep. And that's, when you look at the pilot shortage that's going on, and it takes a lot of money, a lot of time to build a competent, qualified pilot to meet the standards that we have in our country and especially in our military. So it's important to try to retain those people because it's just, a decade to make a good fighter pilot.
Now, how would you compare flying the F-16 in combat to doing it with the Thunderbirds?
Um, I mean, there's a lot more at stake, I think, in the combat scenario, but then also it's kind of hard to say that, right? Because I think I flew over, like, our biggest show had 400,000 people on the ground, right? So you want to make sure that they're safe and they're pretty densely packed there in the show line. And we have an aerobatic box, which is where all of the kind of directed energy goes so that the crowd is safe if there was a mishap. Um, so it's kind of hard. It's not totally apples and oranges, obviously, because you're flying the F-16. But there's, a lot that goes into them. I do remember thinking there was one specific sortie on the Thunderbirds where we kind of pushed and I felt like I was going to combat. And that sortie, we were doing a flyby over the Intrepid in the Hudson River in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were going to go out and hold and then fly over the Mets game. But on the way in, there's a VFR, which is visual flight rules. So it's like you can see other airplanes, you avoid them up the Hudson River. And the Hudson River has this VFR corridor. Um, and it's like American rules of the road, right? In on
Right.
the right, stay on the right side, whichever. But we're going way faster than everybody else. Like, like a 172 doing 100, 120 knots, and we're doing like 350. um
Wow.
and I couldn't look because I was flying off boss's wing, and like the Statue of Liberty is going by and I see like a little plane go by on the other side, and I was like, holy cow. And that's a lot of trust in your lead. And we had a photographer, so he was kind of help clearing, so there was like another F-16 that was flying kind of out of the formation, but that felt like trust, like a lot of trust. um Doing that, going up that river, like it just felt like, man, we're going in, and hopefully everything's okay. And then also, it's only so wide, and we're like 6 airplanes across, and we are flying really close together, but that's still a pretty wide formation compared to a normal airplane, flying up the right side of the river or back down. And I will tell you on that sortie, it's kind of a fun story. I haven't talked about this in a long time. We were holding and we started to push. And at the Met Stadium, they hadn't announced like the other team, but they had queued us to come in. And then they started announcing like whoever the Mets were playing. And then our the person who's calling us in for the timing was like, "Oh, we need to like wait." And then they went and talked to the announcer, and they're like, "You have to like go with the national anthem." So in the meantime, we start zigzagging, and we're by LaGuardia and Kennedy and like all these airports, out there, and we're kind of like trying to slow down and zigzag to kind of build space. And then all of a sudden they start the national anthem. So now we're like late. So
Oh, wow.
we we went hauling the mail over at the top of the Met Stadium and then kind of come out over the Hudson River. And it was just like this like 5G turn in formation and the sun was setting. And it's like one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And I'm like looking, I have chills just telling you about this. And I'm like looking over the boss's wing because I'm just staring to I was the right wing, staring to the left at his wingtip and kind of the sight picture I'm looking for. And I can see like the World Tower One going by and the Manhattan skyline. And you can see like the sunset like colors reflected in all the buildings. It was such a beautiful, cool experience.
Wow. Well, you brought up something that crossed my mind, and the word trust. And when you're
Yes.
flying that close with that many planes together, that must take a heck of a lot of trust to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've changed things a little bit, but when you are a new one of the two wingman positions, it's your first year and it's the bosses, the leaders' first year at the same time. Like that's kind of scary because they're learning and you're learning. And so you can't really get in there and you have this like self-preservation um impulse, right? And the stick of the F-16 moves very, very little. And we would fly with the trim nose forward, which meant that if you let go of the stick, it'll drop down, but the trim helps to trim off normally for level flight. But we would fly with variations in the backstick pressure. And it was really just kind of like pulling with your fingertips, but like sometimes it's like 30 pounds of like pull that you're doing. So my right arm was very strong. We joke like Popeye on your right side and olive oil on the left side. Um, but initially was like self-preservation. I kind of was with that teeny tiny little bit of pressure was kind of like eking away my first month in training. And then consciously I was like, I need to be in position. And so it's left rudder to like move yourself over. So I was flying just slightly crooked, maybe like 3 to 5 degrees off of the boss. And they film everything with high definition cameras. And then they pause it and you can see like there's stripes on the wingtips. And mine are like, like a little bit off for the first month. So, but it was good. I mean, everyone's very professional fighter pilots and you do build that trust really quickly. And yeah, it's at the end of the day, at the end of that tour, flying was about 5% of the job, and 95% of it was just working with other people, like interpersonal relationships between the team, meeting crowds at the crowd line, going to different cities, and maybe we meet the mayor and they give you a key to the city, or there's a governor here, or like community leaders and business owners and other teams from like the Canadian Snowbirds were there and at one of the shows. Um, so yeah, the flying was really cool, but a lot of it is just like you are always on parade, like forever.
Yeah, I know out here in California, because we have naval bases, like the Blue Angels are like huge out here too. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was lucky enough. This is the only time I've ever seen the Firebirds, but that was out here in SoCal. And I want to say it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And they were flying here in Southern California and they were like flying over our city. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I'd never seen the Thunderbirds in person before
Yeah.
because they're out here. We're used to seeing the Blue Angels, but it was pretty cool to see the Firebirds or the
Yeah.
Thunderbirds. I'm sorry, the
Yeah.
Thunderbirds. So it was really cool to see them flying over. And I've got a picture somewhere of the Thunderbirds flying in formation. I
Oh, cool.
pulled out my phone camera, and I'm like, oh, I got to get this. And I got it. And
Yeah.
I was so happy. But gosh, what an amazing thing to fly for the Thunderbirds. I mean, that
Yeah.
had to be very gratifying to do that.
Yeah, it was. And, there's still relatively few women. Like in the all of aviation, it's like 6% women. And in Air Force, like fighter pilots, it's like less than 1%, probably less than half of a percent are women. So there's a lot of first, but I was a reservist when I went to the team and I was on
Mm-hmm.
full-time orders. So I was the first woman to do that. There'd been Stroker Gustafson went before me, um, like in 2006 or seven, I believe. Um, and then, but I was the first mom. So, I had a little bit of a different, um, I guess, life past. And I was a little bit older because I was a reservist. So I had a lot of flying experience, more hours compared to some of the other pilots. I had like 2,700 hours. And some people come to the team with as few as 1,000. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So tell me, what inspired you to take all of that and to write your book, Thundermouse?
So my son was 3 years old when I got selected to fly on the Thunderbirds, and um, we trained at home, which they've changed their training schedule. But it was we flew twice a day, every day during training season. I'd come home completely wiped out, sometimes even too tired to give my son a bath. Um, and then once training season, or once the deployment season, the air show season started, that was March through November, we'd leave on a Thursday morning, fly a practice show on Friday, and we do a bunch of community stuff. We do like a school visit that day, uh, and then we do like VIP stuff that day, and then fly a show Saturday, Sunday, come home on Monday, and then practice on Tuesday. And Wednesday was our only like non-work day. So my son was like, "Well, mom, like I really miss you. Can I go with you? Like I want to go fly with you." And I was like, "Well, there's only one seat in the airplane, so I can't bring you with me." And he said, "But what if I turn into a mouse and then I can just hide in the cushion and I can go with you?"
Aw,
So from my 4-year-old son, you know, I had this idea, and I would bring different stuffed animals with, and I wrote it in a poem, which is not what the version is that's published now, but I kind of wrote this little poem about a mouse that flew in the airplane, like snuck into my flight bag, which is sitting right behind me actually. Um, Snuck into my flight bag, and then as soon as the canopy was closed, the mouse comes out and like sits on the shoulder unobserved by mom, and gets to fly across the country and see all of the landmarks in our beautiful country, and then it gets to do all the maneuvers and flies in the show. And then when they go home, he sneaks back into the son's room and whispers in his ear, and the son dreams about flying with his mom. So it's really about connection, and I think a lot of military people can identify with it, but also a lot of corporate people who have to travel 25-50% of the time for their job and have kids at home. So it's gotten um, a great reaction. And I've even had a couple, like some of the most touching is, a family that had like an issue, and like there's like one of the kids is in the intensive care unit, and they mom and dad are separate from the other kids because the sibling is there. And so there's nothing that can replace togetherness and being with somebody, but telling a story and having imagination and kind of making fun with it helps.
tell me, for you, because there are so few female fighter pilots, what is it like for you being a role model to little girls out there or women that may want to be a pilot one day?
Yeah, I do think that's very important. And I love it. Um, it was kind of interesting, and it's been 10 years now since I left the Thunderbirds, coming up on 10 years this November is my last show. Um, and there, I remember one day this mom was like, "Hey, to her daughter, she's like, look, it's a female pilot." Her mom's like, or the girl's like, "Duh, mom, I know. Like, girls can fly airplanes." So it's interesting, and I still like just at Oshkosh. I was at the Oshkosh Air Show, and there's a young woman who's now like an airfield manager, and loves aviation, working in aviation. I had met some younger people who are like, oh, one guy was like, "Oh, I want to go to the Naval Academy," and I was like, "Well, I'm a liaison officer for the Air Force Academy, so I can kind of walk you through that." And the Navy has the same thing. And lo and behold, he graduated from the Air Force Academy and is flying fighters now too. And another young woman that I helped mentor, she had a great, foundation with her dad in the Navy, but I got to do some mentoring with her, so that was really cool. But I'm a boy mom, and I know that my son will grow up to not limit the women in his life and expect certain roles out of them, and know that women are very capable to do anything that they want.
Let's take a quick break and then we'll come right back and finish up our interview. How's that, Caroline?
Fantastic.
All right, so we will be right back with more of this episode of the Total Podcast with me, your host, Phil Scott, and my special guest, Caroline Blaze Jensen. And welcome back to this episode of the Total Podcast with me, your host, Phil Scott, and my very special guest, Caroline Blaze Jensen. So, Caroline, thanks again for doing the podcast today. I really
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Phil. I'm
You're
having fun.
Thank you. Me too. All right. So, Caroline, now being an author, for you, what was the most difficult thing about getting your book published and just the whole process of writing your book?
The most difficult part was easily working with the company that I um, had printing my book. So um, I don't know if I want to use their name, but the quality was really bad. The paper quality was bad. The printing was bad. The bindings were falling apart. It was a bunch of quality control issues. And I literally had 100 emails back and forth between me and the printing company with defects, which they just kind of blew off. So it took a very, very long time to get resolution. So I'm actually kind of relaunching the book.
Hmm.
I found a different printer in the state of Minnesota, and they've been super wonderful. And, it's really close and they're very reactive, responsive, and have given me some beautiful copies of the book. So I'm kind of relaunching it again this fall. Um, and it's coinciding with me being inducted into the Wisconsin Aviation Hall of Fame,
Nice.
which is cool. And along with it, I wrote out and read an audiobook that's in a longer format that is very immersive. There's lots of cool like noise and original score that accompanies the different scenes in the book. And you can hear like jet engines and crowds and the dog barking and all this kind of stuff. So um, it's really fun, and so I'm kind of relaunching it. But the sales have gone well, especially for a self-published author. But we're about to bring out some really cool new stuff.
And have you had a chance to go out and share your book with families and kids and maybe schools? And what's been the feedback been like for you?
Oh, they love it. I've had a couple, people say it's their kid's favorite book. They read to them before they go to bed every night. The colors are beautiful. Um I retired from the Air Force in 2020, and I was living in Las Vegas, stationed at Nellis Air Force Base, and I went to work for Boeing in St. Louis on the T-78 Red Hawk, and actually I got to fly it.
I was going to ask
As
you about that too. So we'll come
Yeah,
back to that.
so yeah, we'll come back to that. But I really wanted to kind of build my own schedule. I'm a single parent, and have been for about 10 years. And I still had my military retirement move. Like they will move me to my home of record for, on the government. And so I used that move to come home. So I moved back to my hometown, have family around, but um, some of those books that weren't quite great, I couldn't sell them. So I brought like 230 copies of my book to the first and second graders at the elementary school that I went to elementary school at.
Oh, wow.
So so they all got a free copy and a little note. So that was really cool to be able to do that.
I think I'm just putting myself in the shoes of a child. But if I was a little one and I saw you and I saw your book, I would just be so fascinated with what you did. Because I can remember when I was a kid, I some professional baseball players visited my school, and I couldn't believe it. I'm like, I just was just in awe of them. And so I imagine that you really understand the impact that you have on the lives of kids that you go out and share your life story with in your career.
Yeah, definitely. And in my career, I do like corporate keynote speaking. Basically, it's kind of like being a leadership and teamwork consultant. But I get asked to speak, to Civil Air Patrol units and different schools. And I love that. And I try to be really honest with them too, because it's tough to be a kid, especially these days with, social media and cell phones and all these different pressures and different interactions with people than, we had when we were younger. Um, so I try to just be really honest. I went through a divorce in my family. It was like really hard on me. I also, if I hadn't had the goal of going to the Air Force Academy like really young, I probably wouldn't have made it. Um, because I had that goal, I worked extra hard, and got my grades up, and I had to take the ACTs 4 times to get in. And, math has not always been my friend. And I went to one of the greatest STEM universities in the country, and then majored in English. So, um, everything works out the way it's supposed to. But I do enjoy talking to those kids, especially in that age range. And I really started my speaking career as a Thunderbird pilot. And you go into a high school, especially like out in California, where there's like 1,000 high schoolers sitting in an auditorium staring at you, and you're the only thing between them and lunch and probably like leaving for the rest of the day. It's not exactly a hostile audience, but they're not like super enthusiastic about being there. And to see them kind of go from like teenagers with their eyes rolling to like sitting up in their seat and totally paying attention, that's what really made me fall in love with the speaking job. And I love doing that in companies too. You can kind of see people looking around, and you can tell when you're touching on, maybe a nerve. And especially, in a lot of industries still, it's like, especially in defense industry, very male dominated field. So it's kind of fun to kind of go in there and, back up the ladies.
Now tell me about flying the Red Hawk.
It is an awesome aircraft. There's been a couple delivered. Since I left, I kind of lost the bubble on where things are, with deliveries to the Air Force. But when I was working at Boeing, we had two. Um, you would know it as like a prototype aircraft, but they're really production representative jets. It's a digitally engineered aircraft,
Mm.
which means that everything is exactly the same on every single version. And, that's not true of the F-16. If we went from one tail number to a different tail number, like the switches were slightly in a different place and the seat would be at slightly different, and just flew like a little bit different. But these aircraft are identical. I was working at Boeing when they joined the first time the Afton, which came from Saab in Sweden, to St. Louis, and we had the other part in St. Louis, and some of those pieces and parts had been manufactured, like in Texas or wherever, and everything's engineered so that when they put it together, all the holes aligned and they drop in fasteners. So it's not like normally when you'd go in a aircraft workshop, you hear like riveting,
Mhm.
and if they rivet wrong, then they have to blend metals. It like slows everything down. But the digital engineering can bring all these pieces together from, far away, and then just drop fasteners in to put these aircraft together. And it's absolutely amazing. So that's wonderful. And then I flew the T-38 a lot, and the T-38 is like 70 years old now. I had 2 tours in it, and the T-7 is replacing that aircraft. So it's cool to fly the next generation aircraft. And when I was a first assignment instructor pilot back in like 1999, 2000, I was like, man, when are we going to get, a new replacement? It's a long time coming, a quarter of a century, and it's still going to be a couple more years before it's fully fielded, with the Air Force. But this T-7 has more thrust in middle power than the T-38 did with the two and engines and afterburner. Um, it's got an amazing large area display. My son's 15 and a half now, and he could figure that thing out in 2 seconds because everybody has iPads and phones and screens and whatnot. Um, there's a lot of really cool built-in features that help you to understand exactly what's going on with your jet in an emergency. There's a lot of redundancies too to keep systems working and to keep that knowledge flowing to the pilot. And it's just so maneuverable, so powerful. Um, and it was really exciting to be a part of this program on the ground floor. But any new aircraft program, has growing pains. But I'm really excited for the day when that gets out there. And I love my history and my heritage, and the red tail name comes from, or the red hawk name is in, paying respect and homage to the Tuskegee Airmen, who were the first Black pilots to fly during World War II, and they painted the tails of their aircraft red. And they were extremely successful at their bomber escort missions and other missions they flew during World War II. So it was really neat to kind of be part of that history. And I got to be there when General Brown, CQ Brown, who's now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he was the first Black service chief in any service. He dropped one of the rivets. We brought him out and gave him a tour, and I was like actually really emotional about it. It was
Wow.
pretty cool to see him do that. And I got to fly one of the we only had 2 jets and we needed them for test flying, but we were able to free up a couple of days, and I flew with one of the test pilots from Boeing. We flew from St. Louis to Andrews Air Force Base so that in the background, while he was doing his swearing in and his acceptance speech, that Red Hawk was sitting behind him. So
Very
that was,
cool. And what
yeah.
was that experience like flying?
Oh, it's beautiful. The interesting thing about it is that it in the past there's been problems like if people are too short or whatnot, like you can't fly because they had these standards for like 5'4" was like the minimum, and then they'd have seat height, and there were waivers, and you couldn't always get them, and that seat or that height requirement affected women more than men
Mhm.
mostly. But the T7 is built so that you can adjust things so it can fit like a bunch more different size people. And um yeah, it was cool. And I mean, on the Thunderbirds I flew cross country all the time, and it'd been a while since I've flown. I could stare out the window all day. I just flew home this morning from the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and I like everybody has their windows closed, and I've like got my window open, like staring out, watching the country go by.
Wow. I wanted to ask you about the F-35s. What do you think about those? Because I know there are different versions for the different
Yeah.
branches of the military. What do you think of the F-35s?
Um, it's a great program. It's got a lot of really interesting capabilities. I think, there's another program with Growing Pains. Um, because the Marines have the F-35, and so they have the vertical um takeoff version of it. There's A, B, and C variants, I believe. And I got to fight with some of them when I was an aggressor pilot. My last assignment, one of my last times, I actually got into a visual merge, and I had one above me and one below me.
Oh,
And
wow.
we have to maintain our block unless you have visual on both of them. And since I couldn't like see, behind me and keep sight on that guy, but I was like, man, I could have, you know, messed up their day. But that's part of the training so that they can learn to take care of us. We were, simulating that we were MiG, like Russian MiG aircraft. So, um, but yeah, they're, I mean, super maneuverable and a lot of capabilities that I wasn't even privy to because I didn't need to know as a aggressor pilot. So, um, our national defense is really important. There's a lot of things that people don't know. That's why when politicians are, bringing classified information places it's not supposed to be, it can be really dangerous to our country, and sending in means and modes that's not supposed to happen. Because like I said, even I'm like flying in the airspace with them, and I'm not even like invited to part of the debrief, because the capabilities are so advanced and unique that it's like very secret. So um, yeah, I mean, it's great. I think they have like, I've never flown in it, and it's a single seat aircraft, but what I heard, they have like a login basically. So you like log into the plane, and that's what's like what you need to do before you start it up or help
Oh,
start it
wow.
up. And yeah, and yeah, it's really, really cool airplane.
Well, I think I have a greater appreciation of just how difficult it is to fly a plane. Just hearing you tell your stories and talking about each individual aircraft and just how different they are. And I don't think the
Yeah.
average person realizes just how different each aircraft is that the military uses.
Yeah. Well, and so now we have like the F-16, F-15. I think the A-10 is considered in it, but it's like a fourth generation fighter. And so the F-22, F-35 are called the fifth gen. And now they also have the next generation air dominance, the NJAD or NGAD, depending on if you're Air Force or Navy, they pronounce it a little different.
Mhm.
Um, but it's probably kind of something along the lines of what Tom Cruise is flying in the opening part of Top Gun Maverick, the latest Top Gun movie. Um, so even that's more advanced. So that's part of the problem because technology moves so stinking fast. It's hard to keep up, especially when these aircraft cost so much money.
And the F-18 has been around for a long time too, different
Yeah, and
versions of it.
that's a Boeing product too. So I got to, see some of that there. And, they came out with the Super Hornet, upgraded it. Boeing has new capabilities for the F-15, created the F-15EX. The F-16 is now being digitally engineered by Lockheed. And, the F-16 just turned 50 years old this year is
Wow.
the 50th anniversary. So it's going to be around for a long time. And it's kind of, new claim to fame is it's the low cost fighter, but it's probably 50 million a plane. I don't quote me on that, but it's not inexpensive, but that's like kind of the numbers that we're dealing with. And it's a real necessity for our national defense too. When you go up against like a country like China or Russia, um, or anybody else that's a little bit more advanced on their engineering and avionics and aircraft.
And I think that furthermore instills just how important it is to make sure that the military is properly funded as well. I mean,
Yeah, and
if you guys
go
don't
ahead.
have the money to do what you need to do, then we're in trouble.
Yeah. So when I was on the Thunderbirds in 2013, the government went into sequestration, and that like they didn't pass the budget. So um the Air Combat Command went into tiered readiness, and that was a third of the combat fighter squadrons were sat down,
Oh
a
wow.
third were preparing to go into combat, and a third were overseas, like in combat. And so the commander of Air Combat Command at the time said, I have a third of my fighter squadrons grounded. I can't let you fly. We
Wow.
got grounded in 2013. So then I was still on the team 2014. I trained, did my last flight with the Thunderbirds 2015. In July of 15, I went to DC and I was a legislative liaison, and I worked in the Senate. And so I got to bring, so then that's when we started these continuing resolutions too. And the military can't operate like that if you only give us like a couple months of money at a time. Like we have these long range programs. And when you start this process, you can't just have a chunk of the money. Like you need a budget for like the entire fiscal year, to be able to do those things. And so part of my job was to help get that message across. And I did that a lot by escorting general officers would come over. And I was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, but I was wearing my civilian clothes, and I would bring them in to meet and greet people. Like I got to meet John McCain, um, Orrin Hatch. I worked for Joe Donnelly from Indiana, who's a Democrat. I know, just a lot of really interesting people. And I got to go to all the Senate Armed Services Committee hearings. And I
Wow.
literally would like move my feet out of the way so Senator McCain could go sit at the head of the dais, for the meetings. And so that was a really neat experience too. But that's where that funding came down, and that was kind of one of the big messages. And we're just a bunch of majors and lieutenant colonels, like 20 of us, embedded between all the offices in the Senate and in the House side to try to help push like, hey, it's really important that we have funding and have complete funding also to keep these programs going.
Now, Caroline, tell me, what do you want? And especially now that you have a teenage son, what do you want your legacy to be in terms of serving in the military and even just being a mom?
Yeah, that's a good question. I spend so much time like really honoring like the WASP. I was on the WASP Museum board of directors as a vice president for a couple of years. I guess I hope that people look at me that way someday. And I had leadership positions in the Air Force as a mom that nobody really had before, and I think I was able to bring a balance. Because it's really easy to work a 12-hour day and get almost kicked out at when the clock strikes 12 hours, because you have to be in 12 hours, so you need 12 hours of rest before you can come in the next day to get ready to fly your mission, or
Mhm.
you're grounded because you don't have enough crew rest. So I think I brought some balance to things. And whenever I could, my son usually had practice after school, and um, I spent a lot of money as a single parent to hire an au pair and have an extra car. And so my au pair would bring him to like baseball or soccer practice, get him all set up, and then I would be able to leave work usually and catch like the last half of it, and be at his game. So it's really hard. You can't have it all, you cannot do it all. And it's kind of like you know talking about spinning plates. You've got all these plates on the sticks, and it's like which one's about to fall off, and that's the one that's kind of the monster you have to feed at the time to make sure that things go smoothly. So um yeah, I guess I hope I have a legacy of balance and just really making sure that we take care of the people at home as much as we do our family at work.
Does your son have any dreams of following in your footsteps at all? Or is he still finding his way?
He loves military. um like he loves to play airsoft. He loves like different camo and fatigues. Like he's all into like different replicas of certain fatigues from different countries, which I find super interesting. I just don't want to push him, and I want an academy grad, and so is his dad. And that's not a place you want to be if you don't want to personally be there yourself, because it's really, really hard. And it's probably almost impossible if you don't have the drive to be there and do that. So I really want to let him find his way. But now that he's 15 and a half, almost 16, I do want to start flying with him a little bit. I taught him how to drive a car. He's doing pretty good at that. So I can use my like 2,000 hours of airplane flying in the Air Force to, give him a taste of that, not push him. If he loves it, he loves it. If he doesn't, then, I'll be happy for him, whatever he chooses.
That's awesome. Well, Caroline, tell us where people can find your book.
Um, so I have a website and it's blazejensen.com. And on there, if anyone's looking for a professional speaker, keynote speaker for any kind of event, I'd be happy to do that. Or any just like one-on-one counseling or small group sessions, I'd love to do that too. But on that page, there is a link to buy the book, and it'll take you to my Shopify site where you can buy the book. And the cool thing about that is that I can sign it for you,
Oh, nice.
or I will sign it for you. You can write a note if you want to, give it to someone in particular. Other than that, everywhere that books are sold, you can go on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc., and
And
find a copy of it there.
and do you have any other social media links that you would like listeners and viewers to know about?
I do. So there's an Adventures of Thundermouse with adventures _of _Thundermouse. So that's for the book. And he's been traveling around. I need to, put some of his travels up on that page. And then my other work is Brilliant Under Pressure, all one word, on Instagram. And then on LinkedIn, you can find me under Blaze Jensen, I think, or Caroline Blaze Jensen on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I followed you on LinkedIn today.
Okay, awesome. I'll go follow you right back.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, this has been such a pleasure and an honor. And so just bless you and thank you for serving our country and for doing every awesome thing that you've done. And it's like I said, it's been an absolute honor to have you on the podcast, Caroline. So thank you so
Uh,
very much.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate your time. And it was really great talking to you today. Best of luck to you.
Thank you. And this interview was definitely worth the wait. So thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. And with that, that is the end of this episode of the Total Podcast with me, your host, Phil Scott. Everyone stay safe, be careful out there, take care of one another, and we will talk again soon.